Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to head to France for the first time since about 2014, if memory serves me correctly. It's been a good number of years since I've reviewed a French beer for you here on the channel. So for this one we're going to check out one of the new generation of Parisian microbreweries, and we're going to go to a little brewery called La Brasserie Fondamentale, the Fundamental Brewery, LBF as they seem to be calling themselves. This is one of their 4 core range beers, an IPA coming in at 6% ABV. So as I say, the last beers that I reviewed from France came in 2014. I bought those at La Cave Boulet in Paris, which is an awesome beer shop. About 80% of the beers that they had at the time were all French and things that you will not find outside of France, so I definitely recommend that you go there if you get the chance. And you know, I noticed that the quality of the French beers is very good. It tends to be the case actually in Europe that if your country is known for making wine, it tends to be the case that the craft beer breweries also tend to be pretty damn good actually. Malma Brewing Company of course hosted a French beer festival a couple of years ago, and a number of those breweries that I'd reviewed back in 2014 appeared there, and again the quality of the beer was just very good. One of the bad things about French beer, the only bad thing I can think of to be honest, is that the beers don't get out there that much, but that is the kind of curse of craft beer. There's a lot of really good beers out there, but they're very regional and they don't make it outside their own counties and stuff like this. But yeah, if you get the chance to go to La Cave Boulet in Paris, it's definitely worth it. Some really top quality French craft beers there that you won't find anywhere else. But really looking forward to trying this one. A big thank you to my friend Hung Wei who brought this beer back on his recent trip to Paris. He went to La Cave Boulet and asked them to pick out a few beers for me, so a huge thank you again to him for making this review possible, and hopefully this is another good French beer. So anyway, as is usual with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I can hopefully do in the future from the Brasserie Fondamentale. Very first time I'm trying one of their beers of course. There's all the usual social media. If you want to see more beer reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the French beers that I've done before. That's being added to whenever I get the opportunity. Like I said though, French beer is quite difficult to come by, and as always please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. And I will apologise in this video in advance for any bad French pronunciations. It's been a very long time since I did my French lessons at school. But anyway, to tell you a little bit about La Brasserie Fondamentale, the Fundamental Brewery. So La Brasserie Fondamentale are based in Paris, and they were founded back in 2018 by Marc Charpentier and Martin Pellet. So the two had attended the Essex Business School of Paris together, and they've both got backgrounds in economics and finance, but they later trained at the French Institute of Drinks, Brewing and Malting, which is called IFBM for short, and then they founded La Bière Fabrique together back in 2016, which can be found in the 11th district of Paris. And there they do things like running beer classes, like beer tasting classes, craft beer workshops, and also brewing lessons as well. But they also sell some home brewing equipment in there, and they've got a selection of craft beers that you can buy as well. There's pictures of it on the website which actually look really quite nice, so I'll need to see if I can check that out the next time I make it to Paris. But over years of running the workshops in this place, they continued to develop different recipes, and they made the people that were coming in to brew beer try their beers and develop the recipe further on the basis of their feedback. But later in 2018 they decided to produce these beers for commercial sale, and they say that essentially the idea behind their company is that they want to make craft beer more accessible and more understood by people in France. France primarily of course is a wine country, so beer is not as popular, but you know there's somewhere in the region of about 1,200 little craft breweries in France these days. I think the population of France is about 70 million, something like that, so you know it is quite a, you know, there will be a hell of a lot of breweries there. And I think back in about 20 you know, maybe about 2015 or so, there was maybe about 500 or so little French breweries, so the scene is constantly growing over there. But they also have the Bar Fondamentale in Pigalle in Paris, as well as Le Bes Villante, which is their outdoor bar. That can be found in the 11th district as well. As of September 2019, when I'm filming this review for you, they've produced 15 different beers in total, and their core range consists of 4 beers. This is the IPA, which is this one here, the Blonde, the Blanche, which is a sort of wheat beer, and there is also the Amber in there as well. I think they've got a Double that's quite widely produced also. But yeah, another very interesting brewery. It's quite difficult to find a lot of information on the French breweries because, you know, they are kind of so small, and it's even more of a kind of niche market in France than it is compared to other places. But cool to come across this one, and it's great to be able to review another French beer for you here after quite a long time. But yeah, that's all you really need to know about La Brasserie Fondamentale just now. That was all I was able to find on them, but if you want to learn more, check out the brewery website in the description below, and you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And if you're interested in all the different beers that they've produced, I'd recommend that you check out either the Rate Beer page or the Untappd page. But yeah, let's get on to the actual tasting of this beer itself then. So as you can see, really nice kind of artwork on this one. Quite simple branding, but I think really quite effective. The other 4 beers in the core range will be presented very similar to this. It's just a case of they've got a different colour on the label. So I think it's if I remember correctly, I think it's one of them is yellow, one of them is red, and one of them is orange. But plain bottle cap on this one, and I do like there on the bottle how it says it's a product of France, or it says it's made with 100% French malt. And that is one of the interesting things about this beer, is that it is made with French malt. There's a few French hops out there. I think Atenum, I want to say, is a French hop. So kind of it'll be interesting to see how you know, whether French malt and French hops develop a little bit further over time. I'm sure they will. There's a few things said here on the back of the beer, and I think it just tells you a bit about the kind of flavours and things like that you would get out of the beer. It was talking about houblon, which, if I remember correctly, is the French word for hops, and it tells you a bit about where this style comes from the 18th century in England and things like that too. As I say, it's been about 10 years or so since I studied French at school, so to be honest, we'll just leave that alone. But yeah, without further ado then, let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. So this one is a 6% IPA made with 100% French malts from Paris in France. Let's get it out and into the glass. So yeah, my friend Hung Wei, he was in Paris for one of his courses that he was doing. He studies business, and I asked him when he was there if he would go to La Cave Boulet and bring me back some French beers, just because they're ridiculously hard to get, and he said he would. So this was one of the ones that they recommended that I try in the shop there. And as I say, that's a brilliant beer shop, one of my favourite ones that I've been in so far, mainly because there was so many things that I'd never seen before. So if you find yourself in Paris, do make sure you go and check out La Cave Boulet. I'll put a link to their Facebook page for you in the description below as well. But yeah, as you can see with this beer, this is poured a really nice, rich orange amber colour. I'm not sure how well the colour is showing up on the camera, but this is a really nice, very rich, almost blood orangey amber colour. There's 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, and quite a few little ones just heading up towards the bottom of that head there. As you can see, the head on this one is about 1.5 fingers. It's starting to die down a little bit, but it's definitely a sort of creamy colour, this one, rather than being absolutely perfect white. But in terms of appearance, this beer is kind of similar to what you would expect of, for example, a West Coast IPA. If I put my fingers behind the glass, you can see there is a good degree of haze to this one, but by no means is it anywhere near as hazy as you would expect from some of these New England IPAs that are coming out these days. But overall, looks pretty nice. Nothing overly surprising about this beer in terms of appearance when you consider what style it is. So let's take a look at the aroma and see how we get on. Ooh, that's really nice actually. Yeah, some nice orangey, fruity qualities jumping their way out of this beer, I think. Yeah, that comes across as really orangey, to be honest. So I'm not sure whether it would be Mosaic or whether it would be Amarillo that's in this one. And usually Amarillo gives you a more kind of oily orange out of the beer, but quite often, you know, the Mosaic will give you a slightly lighter, juicy tangerine quality. But yeah, definitely some lovely orangey notes to this one. In terms of fruitiness, I do wonder if there might be a bit of Cascade in here as well. There's just something in my head that says this might be Amarillo or Mosaic and Cascade. You can definitely smell that slightly distinct floral quality that you'll get from Cascade. It's a very light. It's the grassiness I think that always makes Cascade stand out, because it's very light and almost a sweet grassiness, and you've got a little bit of a slightly harsher floral quality behind it as well. The original higher alpha acid hop, if you like, but Cascade I think is around 8% alpha acid. So yeah, the hoppy notes in this beer are really nice, like very juicy, big oily oranges, a little bit of a juicier tangerine, and some of those nice slightly grapefruity notes that you would pick up from Cascade. So I really like how this goes together. The fruity notes in this beer are very, very nice. On the green side of the hops, I would say that this beer leans a little bit more towards the grassy side of things, but it does have a little bit of that lighter, earthy quality and also some floral notes as well. This IPA, in terms of the aroma, comes across as being very, very balanced, and I really like that about it, to be honest. The aroma in this one is very nice. It's a little bit old school. I mean, if you go back to let's say 2015, something like that, then this beer is a little bit nostalgic for me in that sense. With the malt base, I would say that it comes across as quite bready, and as I say, the malt base with this one is probably going to be the really interesting part, because it is French malts. Most breweries these days in Europe are using German malts. Some of them will use a bit of English too, and American malts. So this is the curious thing about this beer. It's distinctly French. So yeah, the malts for me, they come across as being very bready, but at the same time they're actually really biscuity and sweet. It's almost like a very kind of sweet honey bread or something like that that's coming out of the malt base of this beer. So a little bit of a kind of honeyish quality in there. It almost comes across as being a little bit wafery and biscuity too, so really interesting. But yeah, definitely a grainy quality to this one. It's really nice how that all goes together. I really like the malt base in this beer. It's really unique, and I've not come across one like that before. So very nice, and it's got a good bit of a white bready quality to it. At the same time, it's got a little bit of a more grainy wholemeal bread quality. Some honey in there, a little bit of a McVitie's digestive biscuit. It comes across as a really nice malty base to this beer actually. So let's have a taste of it and see how we get on. I'm very, very curious about this beer on the basis of the aroma. It actually, the way that the malts come out in this one, it really reminds me of the aroma that you would get, for example, from US 05 yeast. It really reminds me of that. So maybe they've used that yeast in there, because it has that. US 05 is one of the first ones that you would use if you're home brewing. It's a lovely yeast if it's used properly, that actually. So yeah, maybe they've used US 05 in this. But without further ado, let's have a taste of this beer then and see how we get on. As I always say, take a bit of time and enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But this one is the IPA, the number 4 from La Brasserie Fondamentale, the fundamental brewery in Paris in France. A huge thank you again to Hung Wei for making this review possible for me. Let's get stuck in. Slange, Skål, Santé. That's pretty nice actually. In terms of the IPA style, first impression that I have of this beer is that this is definitely one of the more kind of grainy, malty IPAs that I've come across actually. Yeah, that's quite nice. They've taken an interesting approach with this one. I think even the French breweries, I'm not sure, and someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I would be guessing that a lot of the French craft breweries would be using either German malts or American malts generally. So for a brewery to use 100% French malt in their beers, I think would be fairly unique. And this beer, I think, on the basis of that, I think that's the reason why this is such a malty-leaning IPA. But I like how this goes together. It's one of these ones that comes across as being very well balanced. It's not one that's punchy in any one particular regard. It is all about just how these flavours kind of balance and go together. But I like this beer. It's pretty nice actually, but quite different to the other IPAs that I've had in recent times. You know, everyone's brewing New England IPAs these days, but this one's more of a kind of, it's almost a little bit like it's got a few elements of a kind of West Coast American IPA, but at the same time it's got a few almost English IPA qualities as well. So yeah, it was. This is just really interesting. So let's try and break the flavour down a little bit then, and see how we get on. So straight away you're going to feel that nice bready base just blanket the middle of your palate there. You can feel that nice smoothness in there. The further that you go into the aftertaste, it really does, the centre of your palate just dries out a little bit, and you start to get more of these you start to get a good bit of a almost spicy, grainy quality out of the beer actually. It's almost, the level of spice that you have in this, it's almost kind of equivalent to what you would get on the sides of your tongue from Columbus hop. It really has that level of kind of spicy, grainy quality in there. It's almost a little bit, it's not quite, it's maybe like a kind of black pepper, like a very strong black pepper actually. The middle of your palate really is quite spicy in this one, and the further you go into the aftertaste, the more that comes out. That's really unusual, to be honest, with this beer. But yeah, in the beginning of the beer, you get the nice smooth bready qualities. It's not quite as wholemealy in things as was coming across in the aroma originally, but it definitely has a bit of that white bready quality. In the centre of your palate, there's maybe a little bit of a biscuity note. I don't think it's strong enough, or it's oily enough to be a full kind of caramel. I think it's more of a McVitie's digestive biscuit sort of thing. But the malty base in this one, as I say, is very unusual. It's actually really quite spicy, to be honest, and that's not something I was expecting from this beer at all. I thought it would be quite smooth and bready, but it really comes across as very cereally and very grainy. It's more spicy than some of these English bitters and things that I've had before, so that's really quite unusual actually. Pardon me. And it also comes across as being very light in its malt base as well. It's not the thickest of beers in terms of its malt base, but overall it's quite interesting that, as I say, it's the first beer I've had, I believe, that uses a completely 100% French malt bill for the malt base. But yeah, in fairness, the more that you drink of this one, the more that slightly spicy character is just toned down a bit. So I really like how that kind of goes together in this one. It takes you a little bit of time, it takes your mouth a little bit of time to adjust to what's going on in the malt base here, and the more that I drink of it, the more that it comes across as being a little bit more kind of caramelly, in fairness. I was saying there wasn't caramel in it earlier, but the more that I drink of it, the more those kind of caramelly flavours come out, and as you move out from the centre of your palate, you get a little bit of a biscuitiness there. If you go towards the front corners of your palate, and move in a little bit, there's maybe just a little hint of a slightly woody flavour in there, but that's very, very minimal. The spicy notes really still take over the flavour of this beer the further you go into the aftertaste. So yeah, an unusual malt base in this one, but like I say, 100% French malt, so it is something a little bit unique. In terms of the hoppy side of the beer then, back corners of the palate, you've got a little bit of an earthiness there, and as you come further forward along the sides of the tongue, it does have a good little bit of a spicy floral aromaticity. It's actually very similar to, it could well be there's a good bit of Columbus in here, and the spicy notes that you get from Columbus hop are actually very distinct, and that's what I'm thinking with this. But the spiciness from the hops really builds quite a good bridge between that slight spiciness you've got in in the malt base as well, so that's quite interesting. But then round the very front curve of the palate, you've got a little bit of a lighter sort of grassy note there. So it's interesting how that goes together. I mean, I wonder if they will have used a bit of French hop in here. Atenum, for example, could be one. Behind the front curve of the palate though, that's where you get that little oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters start to push their way out of the beer. And the fruity notes in this one, it's with all the spice and things that's coming out of this beer, it's kind of difficult to pick out some of the fruity notes, to be honest. It's difficult to focus on them. But yeah, so on the fruity side of things, definitely a little bit of a grapefruity note. If you go to the back of that oily bubble, a good little bit of grapefruit in there. I don't think they would have used Chinook in here. It doesn't come across, I mean, there is a good bit of an almost resinous quality to this beer now that I think about it. And you've got a bit of that darker grapefruit. There could well be Chinook used in this beer, but overall it's quite a dark grapefruity quality. You've got some sort of orangey notes there as you move further forward, dark grapefruit at the back, and a more oily orangey quality as you move further forward in that oily bubble. And those are the two things that are kind of sitting there. I was saying I thought there might be Cascade used in this beer before. I'm not quite sure, but at the same time, going by the flavours, it might just be that if there's Chinook or Columbus in there, it's kind of, you know, sort of pushing those Cascadey flavours back. But yeah, there's not much. It's kind of interesting that just how it goes together. This is just such an unusual IPA, and of course when you've reviewed about 1800 beers, you do want things that are going to make you think a little bit. But yeah, so on the very tip of the tongue, you'll get a good little bit more of that kind of spicy, grassy sort of ester. It's maybe a very slightly lemony on the front of the tongue too, but it's almost like a really old school, heavily bitter IPA, this one. It's really distinctly kind of West Coast American in some ways, but the malt base is really unusual and kind of quite spicy. So yeah, I like how they've done this. This is quite unusual, and as I say, this is what you want after 1800 beer reviews. You do want things that are going to make you think a little bit. So thumbs up to La Brasserie Fondamentale for this one. They've certainly made me think a little bit about this beer. So yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel then, I would describe this beer as being mid-bodied. Yeah, mid-bodied beer. Carbonation is pretty smooth in this one. The mouthfeel overall is fairly oily, to be honest. It does get a little bit drier the further you go into the flavour, right enough. The malt base has a good balance between being smooth and being a little bit sweet, but the spiciness really kind of takes over on this beer the further you go into the aftertaste, as I mentioned. Good bit of IBU to this one. I think you're talking maybe 70 or even 80 IBUs out of this one, and that's both from the spiciness in the malt base and the spiciness from the hops that are in there. As I say, I suspect maybe Columbus, could maybe even be a little bit of Chinook in here. So yeah, good bit of hoppy bitterness, 80 IBUs I would reckon, and there's a nice little bit of a juicy fruity note to this one as well. So overall, a really interesting beer, this one of the more spicy and bitter IPAs that I've had in recent times. So kind of interesting to go back to the level of West Coast bitterness that we used to get from the likes of the Sierra Nevada Torpedo and things like that. And I think that's probably a good point to make about this beer, is that if you like the things like Sierra Nevada Torpedo, Ballast Point Sculpin, this is one of the beers that you are going to enjoy. This one comes across as being a very old school West Coast IPA with the grapefruits and and a little bit of an orangey quality there. It's definitely a nice old school IPA, this one, but the unique point I think is that bit of spiciness that you're getting from the malt base. So big thumbs up to La Brasserie Fondamentale for this one. I think they've done an awesome job of it, and I'd be quite curious to try the blonde and the Bianche beer at some point as well. So yeah, let's leave it at that for this. This one is the number 4 IPA from La Brasserie Fondamentale in the 11th district in Paris. Thank you again to Hung Wei for making this review possible, and I hope you guys have enjoyed another French beer review. It's been too long since I've done one of these, so I need to try and find some way of getting French beers on the channel a little bit more regularly. But thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from La Brasserie Fondamentale as well. Do give me some other French brewery recommendations, and I'll see see what I can do about getting those for you on the channel. Make sure you check out my social media, and make sure you check out the Brasserie Fondamentale as well. Until the next time, Slanger just now, and I'll catch you guys later. This was the IPA from the Brasserie Fondamentale in Paris in France, a really old school West Coast type IPA, this one with quite a unique spicy malty character. Until the next time, Slanger just now, and I'll catch you guys later. Slanger, Skål, Santé.